most of the media has totally dropped the ball on this story. Most of the media has not done the reporting about the fact that the plant didn't notify the EPA that it had this ammonium nitrate, or the fact that the plant was essentially flouting the law, which limited the number of chemicals, the amount of chemicals of that type that were allowed at that plant. One person has been doing a bang-up job, though, a terrific job in terms of covering the stories. Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks. Here's him this week with the latest reporting.
Well, it turns out this plant did self-regulate. The EPA asked them, hey, how you doing? And they said, oh, don't worry about it. We're doing great. They said, what is the worst-case scenario? Quote, there is no risk of fire or explosion at the facility. They said the worst-case scenario was you might smell some ammonium from time to time. No risk of fire or explosion.
That's right. So when the plant owners did decide to tell the EPA something, they said, well, there's no risk of fire explosion. The plant did not have sprinklers. They did not have shutoff valves. There were no fire alarms. They did not have the legally required blast walls. And keep in mind, fertilizer accidents have happened before in Texas. One of the worst accidents in 1947 killed over 500 people. So this is something where you kind of want to have some regulation when you're talking about fertilizer. And oh, by the way, ammonium nitrate, that was what Timothy McVeigh used in the Oklahoma City bombing of the Murrah Federal Building. He used 2 tons. At this plant, there were 270 tons. 270 tons. Now, over a 3-day period after, and again, once the Reuters news agency reported that there were 270 tons of ammonium nitrate at the plant, which is 1,350 times the amount that is allowed to be stored without disclosure to the federal government. In other words, if you're not going to disclose it to the federal government, you need 1,350 times less that amount of ammonium nitrate. So that was out there. The Reuters news agency puts this out. And in the 3 days following that report, okay, CNN never reported on the West Fertilizers reporting violations. For 3 days, in all the segments that CNN did, 24 segments, not once did they mention that this plant failed to report to the EPA. MSNBC, out of 16 segments in the first 3 days, one segment by Chris Hayes, in which they noted that, well, this plant failed to notify the EPA about the chemicals that it had. Fox News, out of 23 segments, one segment out of 23. Only one segment out of 23. No segments on CNN. One segment about MSNBC. And folks, we're talking about the safety of people who live in this town. We're talking about a plant that was required by federal law that if it was going to store these types of chemicals to notify the Environmental Protection Agency. And then folks may think, oh, well, why is that so important? Because once the EPA knows that you have that much ammonium nitrate, then the EPA notifies fire and police and lets everybody in that area know if you're headed to a fire at that location, you need to have special training in order to put it out. But of course, because the plant doesn't notify the EPA, the local firefighters, police, they have no idea. They simply rush to the scene, as those brave first responders are supposed to do. They rush to the scene and start pouring water on this fire, thinking they're going to be putting it out. And several of those volunteer firefighters lost their lives almost instantaneously because they were pouring water on this plant. It ratcheted up the severity of the fire. It caused the fertilizer tank to explode, killing 15 people altogether, wounding 150.